Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Alyssa Parker, and I'm the Director of Communications here at BBB, serving Eastern North Carolina. Even throughout these unprecedented times, we're continuing to serve the community and will be a vital asset in providing support and guidance throughout these trying times. One of the ways we're offering support is by collaborating with industry experts and hosting webinars such as this one that will focus on helping businesses get through this pandemic. These webinars are free for you as an accredited business, and we encourage you to register for all of the additional webinars we have already scheduled, and you can do so at bbbevents.org. We're incredibly appreciative of Patrick Rodriguez of the SBA for being here to present this vital information on economic injury disaster loans. We will let Patrick present, and then we will get to questions. So be sure to submit your questions in the question box. And like I said, once he has finished presenting, we will get to them. We're also planning on hosting an additional question and answer session with Patrick in the coming days, so be on the lookout for information on that so we can get any additional questions that you may have answered at that time as well. So without further ado, Patrick, if you want to take over, we're excited to have you here. So thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me this afternoon. I really appreciate you offering to host this this information session on SBA disaster loans. It's a trying time. I'm getting just unimaginable amount of calls regarding SBA disaster loans, and businesses have been affected by this, since late January, basically. So I'm trying to give an overall kind of a 30,000 foot view of what is available currently. I'm not going to go into other bridge loans or other assistance at this time, but I'm going to try to stick to the SBA disaster loan just for economy's sake. And the SBA economic injury disaster loan is just one piece of the federal government's response to this coronavirus situation, and I wanted to make that clear. There's more being looked at in Congress, and there's other phase 2, phase 3 stuff coming out. I'm hearing, but the SBA disaster loan is a program that's been around for a while, and right now we've been appropriated $50 billion with the B by the administration to help in this first tranche of SBA disaster loans. I'm going to put the next slide up here. We are encouraging all small businesses, all nonprofits to apply for SBA disaster assistance. And the reason we're doing that is because we want to get as much capital out to small businesses and nonprofits as possible. And with the volume that we're having, we would rather have somebody's application in the pipeline versus them waiting to get this funding when it's hopefully not needed at the beginning versus really needed at the end. So to get it into the business's hands as soon as possible. So North Carolina is on the list of eligible states. If you go to the website we're going to be showing you in a little bit, which is the sba.gov/disaster website, you'll be able to apply online. And these are working capital loans available to small businesses, small agricultural cooperatives, small aquaculture businesses, and most private nonprofit organizations. So what we're looking at is across the board, businesses have had economic injury, which is different from the normal disaster like we have here, which are hurricanes where we have physical damage. So when and if you apply for a disaster loan, you want to make sure you're marking economic injury as the reason for your disaster loan application. And we're literally telling everybody, please apply. We practically waive the credit elsewhere test. So you do not need to be declined by a bank to go to apply for an SBA disaster loan. You just have to have the need for that capital. We're getting very lenient on the credit review, so that's also something that's been taken into consideration. And we're looking at practically just your crisis cash flow estimates for what you've been doing before January 31st, 2020. So let's go to the next slide. So what is the criteria for a loan approval? You got to have at least a decent credit history acceptable to the SBA. So it's being kind of being very lenient there. Repayment. So you must determine that the applicant has the ability to repay. So, we're looking at your previous cash flow, 2018, 2019, whichever tax return you have available, that will be utilized. If, for instance, you come to a number that you think you're going to need and it's under $500,000, for most intents and purposes, the SBA does not need to see your tax returns. But if that number that gets put out there for your disaster loan is above $500,000, then we will require the business's tax return to be submitted along with the application. You have to have a physical presence in the state. So you can't just have a PO box or anything like that, but be operating out of Virginia or other states. But in this case, that's not as important because the disaster pretty much covers all 50 states. So no matter where you are, you would be able to apply. The next slide is how much can you borrow? So anywhere from a few thousand all the way up to 2 million. The term is up to 30 years with a 3.75% interest rate and a 2.75 interest rate for nonprofits. And I know in today's low interest rate environment, 3.75 seems pretty high, but that was appropriated and authorized by Congress. So it would literally take either administrative rule change or an act of Congress to get that interest rate lower at this time. That's not to say that future legislation may lower it or could. We don't know. But the SBA has authorization at this time for disaster loans with those interest rates, and more info to follow. I've been getting a lot of questions on, are these forgivable? Will they turn into grants? And we just don't know. SBA's authorization allows us to do 30-year loans at these interest rates. And at this time, we don't have any further information if those will be forgiven or not. But that's what we have as of today. So as you work through the loan process, you will notice that the loan application is going to be asking you for what fixed debts do you have? What payroll do you have? What's your current accounts payable? What other bills do you have that you cannot pay right now because of the disaster? And so you're going to make a schedule of debts, basically, of fixed debts that you have in your business. And you're going to list every single debt you can think of in there. And then you're going to list your revenue, and that should jive with your tax returns. And then the SBA is going to come up with a number. And it's going to say, this is what we think the SBA disaster loan should be. So it's not like a typical loan where you would say, I need to borrow 100,000 and then go put that in the box 2 asking for 100,000. This is going to be, you're going to list your debts, your payroll, your accounts payable, other bills, and the SBA is going to work through a formula to come to a number. And they're going to offer you that. You can also go back to the SBA and say, I think I'm going to need more. Or if you take what they offer you and you don't need it, you could always pay it back later without a penalty. You could pay early prepayment without a penalty. That being said, in one of the forms, the narrative form, I would also suggest in that narrative section, you state a dollar figure that you think you need. If there's a certain number that you just know that that's going to get me through the end of 2020, then put that number in there and kind of restate your case briefly so the SBA knows, like, in general, what ballpark number you're looking for. Okay, next slide. The terms, again, for anything over 25,000, we're looking to potential collateral. So that doesn't say that if you don't have collateral, you're not going to be eligible. That's not the case. We do not decline SBA disaster loans for lack of collateral, but we will require borrowers to pledge the collateral that is available in their business or personal assets if needed. So we'll take a look at the available collateral. What kinds of small businesses can apply? You're looking at almost all businesses: hotels, recreational facilities, boats, manufacturers, sports vendors, owners of rental property, restaurants, retailers, souvenir shops, travel agencies, wholesale. You name it, basically, we will cover, and those businesses we will be eligible. I'll cover the non-eligible ones in a minute. So if you're a small business owner and you're a sole proprietor, you would qualify. If you are a, if you're a beauty salon owner and you're the owner and paying yourself wages but have 1099s, you yourself would be eligible, and then the 1099s in your shop would also be eligible for their own individual disaster loans. So like I said, you have to have a physical presence, which is not a big deal in this emergency, but that for North Carolina, you're going to apply under the state that you're located in. So SBA disaster loans are a little bit different than normal loans. So they come directly from the U.S. Treasury. So they do not go through a third-party bank. They do not have any relation to private lenders whatsoever. So just be careful. There's some scams out there for SBA loans through third-party lenders. Those aren't real. Be careful. And there's a DOJ website you can report them to. But so SBA lends directly during times of emergency. There's no cost to apply. There's no obligation to take the loan if offered. And if you have an existing SBA disaster loan, there's no cap or anything you can take out, because we get hit with quite a bit of hurricanes. There's a lot of small businesses out there that have disaster loans already on their books. So those disaster loans have been deferred until 2021, and you can take out additional disaster loans if needed. And if you have an existing SBA loan that's not a disaster, just an SBA 7A loan or 504 loan, the disaster loan does not count towards your maximum amount. So you can take an SBA disaster loan in addition to a normal SBA loan. So the basic filing requirements. So everything is being pushed online. So we have the application online, and we really prefer that the application goes through the portal. And these are some of the forms that you can take a look at, and you can actually just Google these, and there's a link on the SBA disaster loan website where you can download these forms in hard copy form, fill them out, and then use them as a basis for your online application, so you can easily transfer over the information. Like I said, under 500K, we're not really too worried about the tax returns, but we will be requiring the IRS form 4506T to be signed and sent in on all applications. And what that does is that gives the SBA the right to directly go to the IRS and ask for the individual's tax returns if needed. So if you're, let's say you own a business with your spouse and you jointly file your tax returns, don't just send in one IRS form 4506T. Please put one for each individual owner and submit one for each individual owner, no matter the amount of ownership level. So if it's 10%, 50%, 2%, please include an IRS form for each owner. All right, so schedule of liabilities is what you're going to be filling out to tell the SBA what your current debts are and bills that are on the books that are being sidelined by this downturn. And then you'll also have a financial statement that will go along with the application. I do have a fax number and an email that you can send in information to, but I'll post that later. All right, additional filing requirements. I'm not going to get into the weeds too much. Just, we're trying to get the latest, greatest tax return if needed. So if you haven't filed your 2019, you'll be giving us your 2018 tax returns, current year-to-date profit and loss, and monthly sales figures. Okay, under the this is just in case, but under the narrative as well, let's say that you have an outstanding tax lien, outstanding federal student loan that has not been paid, outstanding child support, felony misdemeanors. You would put any information related to those topics in the narrative as well, just to give the SBA information on what kind of tax liability, child support liability, and student loan liability you have outstanding that has not been paid, just in case. For private nonprofit organizations, we're looking at nursing homes, food kitchens, museums, education facilities, senior centers, daycare centers, playhouses, community centers, shelters, rescue organizations, associations. All of these are eligible private nonprofit organizations. And let me get rid of this here. Okay. Yeah, so as long as it's one of those, you should be fine. Okay. All right. Next slide. Ineligible entities. So we're looking at some of the businesses that are ineligible or not eligible for SBA disaster loans. Agricultural enterprises, if the primary activity of the business including its affiliates is defined in section 18B1 of the Small Business Act. So that's a little bit of technical jargon, but we can look that up for you. Religious organizations, charitable organizations, business considered hobbies, and government-owned concerns are not eligible. Gambling concerns, casinos and racetracks, and real estate developers and establishments primarily engaged in the subdividing of real property into lots are not eligible. How to apply. So this is where we mentioned we're really focusing on the online application. It is busy. We've been told anecdotally that that Edge and Explorer web applications are better than the Chrome application for some reason. So if you have Edge or Explorer, try to use those before Chrome. It seems to work a little bit better for some reason. And if you need to download those applications, like I said earlier, you can go to sba.gov disaster, and there is a 1-800 number that is staffed by SBA and FEMA personnel. We just had an additional, what would you call it, a task force sent over from FEMA to the SBA Loan Servicing Center to help with the call volume. And the number there is 1-800-659-2955. Or you can email them at disastercustomerservice@sba.gov for information. So once you fill out your application, you can call that number and you can get an update on your loan application and see where it is. And I would also remind folks that that if in case you were to forget a form and SBA emails you back, to reply to that email within 7 days. 7 days is when they will withdraw your loan application. So we're trying to get people to monitor their spam in their inboxes while they're in the queue for the SBA disaster loan. All right, so for local assistance, I'll also share some partners here. I'm going to mention them, and hopefully you guys can go to their websites. But SBA, of course, has nationwide partners, the Small Business Technology Development Center here in North Carolina. They're co-located throughout the state at universities, and they're operating virtually right now. And if you go to sbtdc.org, and that's SBT as in technology, DC, so Small Business Technology Development Center.org, sbtdc.org. You can go on there and schedule an appointment for assistance in filling out your disaster loan application. And the more information to follow, they are ramping up those call centers and assistance centers as we speak. You can also go to score.org, and you can also look up the closest women's business center to where you're located for help and assistance in applying for SBA disaster loans. I'll also mention the Veterans Outreach Center, which is located in Fayetteville. And at this time, I'll leave it up to the local chambers to get out their information. I'm not sure exactly which chambers of commerce are actively participating at this time. So you want to submit your application as soon as possible. Make sure you fill out all the forms, all the boxes if necessary. I'll take a little bit of time here just to mention that there is a box in the application that says trade name, and you can leave that box blank if you need to. It's not necessary to fill that in. Sometimes in the application process, it will complicate the loan application. So you just have to fill out your full legal name, and that would mean your full legal business name. And you can leave the trade name box blank. So the biggest reason for delay is just missing information, unsigned documents. You want to submit as much as possible the first time around. And if you need more funding, you can also submit information and request an increase in your loan proposal. And if less funds are needed, you can also reduce that amount if needed. If you are denied, the applicant has up to 6 months to provide new information and submit a written request for reconsideration. So I would say that's at the longest, and that would be the absolute longest. I would suggest you putting in a request for reconsideration as soon as possible, as soon as you find out. And don't get too hung up on that. I've had some folks fill out the application incorrectly, and within a couple of days, they're getting denials. So what you want to do is you want to call on that number and ask them why you were denied, and have them tell you, oh, well, someone didn't fill out the 4506T, the form for giving SBA permission to get your tax returns from the IRS. And that was an immediate reason for them being denied. That's a document that has to be in the application in order for them to be approved. So it could be as simple as you just didn't send in a form. All right, so I'm coming to the end of the presentation. As we had kind of laid out, I wanted to leave some time for Q&A and kind of have people ask questions if needed. SBA's disaster loan program is not like a typical bank loan, a conventional loan. We are looking at cash flow, pre-virus cash flow. So we want to look at what was going on before this disaster happened. We're not necessarily in the business of utilizing collateral for disaster loans. And we're really looking at that historical data to then forecast what you're going to need going forward. I didn't mention this, but just in case, you cannot use an SBA disaster loan to refinance existing debt or for expansion. Just in case you were wondering, it's meant to really pay off the bills that you're unable to pay while you're in this economic downturn. All right, and for that, I think I will leave it there for maybe the last 20 minutes or so, if anyone has any questions.
Yes, Patrick, thank you. It's Alyssa again.
Sure.
Please submit your questions to the question box on the right side of your screen, and I'll go ahead and start reading some of the ones that we have. So Patrick, I have one that says, when I applied for the SBA loan, they requested the business tax returns. Are these not needed or required?
So if they emailed you in response to your loan application and they asked for them, then yes, I would supply them the latest version of your tax returns that you've completed.
Okay. Another question that we have is, if you have completed the F4506T form, do you have to provide your tax returns?
It depends, yes. So yeah, it's not an either or. It is, we want to see your latest tax return and we want the 4506T signed. So we're basically saying we're taking you at your word that this is your tax return, but we also want to have the ability, if needed, to go directly to the IRS and compare what the IRS has with what you submitted. So it's kind of like insurance just on our end, just to make sure that we have the 100% accurate tax return in the SBA's case file.
Okay, great. Another question that we have is, what is the typical turnaround time?
Great question. So we're looking at 8 to 21 days for processing, just depending on the complexity of the documents and the, maybe potential affiliations, but 8 to 21 days for processing, and then an additional 5 days for disbursement. So until you get those, a lot of the times the checks are mailed. So until then you get them in your hands and then be able to cash them. So 13 days low end, 26 days upper end. As volume grows, hopefully those numbers will hold. But we're encouraging everybody to apply early.
So this is another question that kind of has to do with kind of, the turnaround and obviously being in line. It says, does when you get your application in determine where you are in the loan queue? In other words, if I got my application in last week, does that move me closer to the top of the funnel?
Not necessarily. So if you're looking for a smaller amount and it's unsecured, it's going to be processed more rapidly. If you're looking for a larger and you have a more complex affiliation situation, it may take a little bit longer. So there's not necessarily first come, first serve. It has a kind of a blended kind of a quality to it, ease of application and amount, and also the complexity of the application.
So another question that we have is, if you currently are not impacted, but are concerned continued market deterioration will impact customer business or result in non-payment of invoices, can you get an Can you get an SBA EDL now so the cash is available if business decline does occur?
Yes, yes, yes. I mean, if you're having any type of financial difficulty, then yes, you could apply now, and really think through some of your metrics from years past. So the NCAA tournament didn't happen, right? That is an economic injury that could be qualified as potential injury to your business because you're expecting that income. So that's a potential way to think about it as well.
So we have two questions that can kind of be consolidated. One is, if you have bad credit, can you still get approved? And another is, what is an acceptable credit score?
What was the first question?
If you have bad credit, can you still get approved? And the second question was, what would be the acceptable credit score?
Got it. So yeah, there's no minimum credit score. We're basically looking at your cash flow. So it's obviously the better kind of more under leveraged situation that you're in, the better. But it's not a credit score traditionally as you would know it. It's not going to get credit scored as a normal bank loan would.
Another question that we have is, how will the SBA contact me if there's an issue with my application so I can avoid scammers posing as the SBA?
Right. So look for anything. Make sure when you're on the website, make sure it's .gov. Obviously, that's the number one. Filling in the application at the right location. .gov. Emails will also have a .gov suffix on them, so you want to make sure you're looking at .gov emails, not .coms. And you can always call the 1-800 directly in response to any email you get and ask them if that's coming from them or not, and just double checking and then verifying through the call-in number.
Another question that we had is, earlier in your presentation, you said that there were several browsers that worked better for the application. Can you please share which ones those were?
Sure. Explorer and Edge. And that's coming from some business owners that have had trouble on the Chrome platform. And so we're just saying, in general, we've heard that there are potentially some issues with the Chrome browser. You may want to try Explorer or Edge browsers.
Another question that we have is, if I have applied for other loans, are there any restrictions for applying for this loan?
No, there's no restrictions. As you may know, today there was announced a press release from the Golden Leaf Foundation, I think, and they're going through local certified development financial institutions, putting out bridge loans. That's not really our program, but those bridge loans are now available through CDFIs here in North Carolina, such as Mountain Small Business Works. That's one of our micro lenders. And you could apply for one of those loans as a bridge loan. Let's say you needed cash today to pay for inventory or to keep the lights on for the next 30 days. You could apply for a bridge loan, and if given that bridge loan, then you could then use that money immediately, and then you could apply for an SBA disaster loan. And I'm putting a lot of ifs there in front of all this. And if you were accepted and given an SBA disaster loan, then you could repay that bridge loan with an SBA disaster loan. So there's a lot of potential hurdles, but that's potential way to get cash immediately and then repay with an SBA loan if approved.
So another question that we have, it says, you're indicating you look primarily at cash flow and improving loans, But if loan is being applied for or because of loss of business and negative cash flow, how does that work in approval? I can read that
Yeah, so
again.
we are looking at prior. No, I think I understand it, and
Okay.
I think they want to know, like, so what time frame are they looking at? Are you looking at cash flow right now, right? And so obviously, if you're looking at cash flow right now, it would be a net, it wouldn't be as positive cash flow as it was 12, 24 months ago. So the SBA is looking at 2018 tax returns for your cash flow. They're looking at 2019 tax returns if you have them and have completed them for your cash flow, not for your current cash flow. We know that these are the times right now that are really hurting people. So we're basically saying, hey, we know before this is what you were doing. This is what we're going to give you your loan against, not the current cash flow situation you're in.
Okay, great.
It's a little different. Yeah.
Yeah, another question that we have says, do you report my payments or non-payments to the credit bureaus?
That's a good question. I'll have to find that out. I don't know where the credit. I don't know what credit bureaus or if credit bureaus track SBA disaster loans. I'll have to find that out.
Okay. We actually have some really good advice in the question box. It says, I started on the Chrome browser last Thursday for their application and it didn't go well. They switched to Firefox the next day and it was much faster. So Firefox seems to also have been helpful for some people trying to get their applications in. So that's helpful information.
That is very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, another question that we have is, obviously we're talking about loans right now. Does the SBA offer grants of any sort?
Not at this time. No, we're not really in the. We do not have the appropriations and authority to make these disaster loans forgivable or grants. That I don't even know if that's being discussed. But right now, SBA just has the authority to do SBA disaster loans at the terms I mentioned earlier: 30 years. 3.75 for profits, 2.75 for nonprofit. So any other discussion would be speculative, and I don't want to put out any false hope for anything of that sort just right now. I think that's to be discussed, to be determined.
Okay, great. I have a couple other questions here. It says, if looking at 2018 cash flow and the business has grown largely in gross revenue, how would that affect the loan amount?
So I guess they're saying 2018 was 200,000 and 2020 is 600,000, and they're going to need more than what their 2018 returns are telling us. So in the narrative section, you just want to state that, from 2018, 2019, you had X amount of growth. These are your numbers that you're going to be giving to your tax return to the IRS for 2019. You may want to put some revenue numbers in there for 2019 in the narrative, and then also say projected 2020. This is what your potential revenues would have been, and state all the debts and all the deliverables and all the payroll and all the accounts payable and other bills that you need for 2020. So it may not capture that growth, you're right, but just put it in the narrative.
Okay, great. Another question that we have says, you mentioned planning ahead for how much would be needed through 2020. Do you recommend over asking for funds when we think they may be needed?
So, I mean, the SBA is going to come up with the number. So they have some algorithm or formula that they use. They're going to look at your revenue from prior years. They're going to look at your schedule of debts that you're going to submit, and any other items that you put in the narrative, and they're going to come up with the number. And it's up to the borrower to decide if that number is enough, not enough, or more than needed. So the term, I mean, if you think about it, I'll just say, the SBA disaster loan that one would take out today does not need to be repaid or starting repayment until after the end of this year, 2020. So that is a 0% interest loan for any intents and purposes until January 1st, 2021. And it could sit on your balance sheet in case something were to happen that maybe extended this this downturn. So you would have it on in a nice kind of cushion, kind of a nice way for your business versus having to come back and ask for more. So I'll leave it to the business owner, but you know, that loan term is pretty reasonable.
Okay. So another question that we have is, to get a bridge loan, I believe the bank will want to know that it's likely that we will get approved by the SBA. Is there anything we can give the bank before we know for sure that we've been approved?
No, there really isn't. No. Unfortunately, there really is not any predetermination or pre-qual that SBA can give to the disaster loan. It's basically, you're just, you know, when you take out the bridge loan, they'll probably ask you, will you be applying for an SBA disaster loan? And you can say yes.
Okay. Another question that we have is, I own an electrical contracting business. Does that business qualify for the SBA loan? I didn't see anything about construction business.
Yes.
Okay, great. Another question that we have is, we already had a loan out for working capital for opening another clinic that was planned to open next week. Will that impact my ability to get approved for an SBA disaster loan?
No, it should not. No. And you should be working with your current lender on your current loan that's not disaster to ask for at least a 3 to 6 month deferral. We have an SBA information notice out there for SBA lenders, at least, to provide a 3 to 6 month deferment. And I would also be working with your lender who may or may not be an SBA lender for a similar deferment.
Okay.
But no, your current loan would not preclude you from getting a disaster loan.
Okay. Another question that we have says, if I'm applying for an SBA loan, will it hurt me to also apply for a disaster relief loan?
Say that again. I'm sorry, I didn't catch the first part.
Yeah, they asked, if I am applying for an SBA loan, will it hurt me to also apply for a disaster relief SBA loan?
No, it wouldn't. I would just I would think through the first loan, the non-disaster loan, just in case, you know, because you know, some businesses are expanding, some businesses are not being affected, so that's a potential you know, reason. So the two do not really have anything to do with one another.
Okay. Another question that we have says, I filled out the SBA loan and I was never asked how much I would like to borrow. Did I miss something?
No, you're right. So there's not going to be a box in there to put an amount down for what you're requesting. It'll be determined by the SBA, and the formula will come back and give you a number based on your revenue and your fixed debts, payroll, accounts payable, and other bills that you list in your schedule of debts. And it's going to come back with a number that we think is adequate. And then you can always ask for more, or you can take less.
Another question that we have says, if your sales have gone down to zero, how is it possible to make the first payment? Is there a deferral of the first payment due? 3 months, 6 months, question mark?
Right, so the SBA disaster loan will not, the payments won't start until after the declaration is over, and currently the declaration lasts until December 31st, 2020.
Okay, good to know. Another question is, my business provides quality control mortgage loan audit services for banks, credit unions, and independent mortgage banks. Does this business qualify for an SBA EDL?
She may want to just, if you want to just have her email you, and then you can send me the question, because I'm not exactly sure what they do specifically.
Okay.
If they're just packaging and things like that, it's possible, but if they're actually lending, maybe not.
Okay, that sounds great.
Yeah.
Another question that we have, if I own a company with my spouse and we are looking for a larger loan, do we each have to submit our tax information?
So they're co-owners?
Yes, they're co-owners.
Yes, right. So yeah, no matter if you're filing jointly or separately, if there's a joint tax return, you would submit the joint tax return, and you each would fill out a 4506T as an individual. So you would have those 3 documents, and if you file separately, you would both submit your individual tax returns, and you would individually sign your 4506T, which would be 4 documents. So no matter what, the owners have to each individually submit a 4506T, even if they file jointly.
Okay.
And
great.
that would apply to all co-owners as well. So if you have a 10% co-owner that's a silent partner, you're going to have to list them in the application. So the one other important piece of that question is, in the application, you will say what the percentage of ownership is. So you'll say, John 50%, Jill 50%. It's got to equal 100. If there was 10% outstanding, let's say by a silent partner, you would say 50, 40, and then you'd have to fill in that 10, or if it's 2, or if it's 1, it doesn't matter. You have to list all the individual owners, and it has to equal 100% at the end of that application.
Okay. Another question that we have is, for a corporation, do I have to submit my personal tax returns?
It depends on how you file. So if it's an S corp, that tax return flows into your personal income. That's and it's not taxed at the corporate level. So if you're an S corp and it flows through into your personal income, then yes, you would. Yeah. And even so any kind of income that flows into that's not taxed would have to be shown through their personal tax return, right? C corps would be a little bit different, right? Because those are larger, and I don't think that's what most people are talking about.
Okay, someone submitted the question asking, if my business provides quality control audit outsourcing services, do I qualify for this loan?
Yes. I mean, as long as they're not in the ineligible category, they would be eligible.
Okay.
Like the list that I previously showed. So you'll have that available, I'm sure.
Another question, let's see, that we have is, can you please repeat the bridge loan partners we should contact to be able to borrow money immediately?
There's a press release out today. If you Google golden leaf and coronavirus or COVID-19, I think the press release should come up at the very beginning. It may list some of their lending partners that they're going through. I know for sure Mountain Biz, B-I-Z, Works out of Asheville is participating in that bridge loan program. mountainbizworks.org is their website, and you'll locate that information on their website as well.
Okay, awesome. Thank you for that. And another thing that I'm going to also say.
I'll just say that there's more CDFIs to come. I know that there's more than just them. So as of today, that's the one I know about off the top of my head. But I know there's more CDFIs that are going to be lending through that program in the days to come.
Okay, great. Another thing that we're planning on doing is we are going to take this recording of this webinar and send it to all of our accredited businesses. So be on the lookout for that. So if there's anything that you have missed, you do have the ability to review this webinar again. Another couple other questions that we have is what are acceptable uses of disaster relief loan funds? Can you give a few examples?
Yeah, fixed debts, payroll, accounts payable, other bills that you can't pay right now because of the disaster, economic downturn. So anything that you can think of, pretty much an operation of your business, just not expansion or refinance.
Okay, great. Are there any additional questions that we have? Please put them in right now. And if not, we'll wrap up. So if you have those questions, please go ahead and send them in right now. Oh, another question that we just received is, can you give us a refresher on the collateral for these loans?
Yeah, so we're not a collateral lender during the disaster loan program. So we were really paying attention to the cash flow pre-disaster. So the SBA basically says that if you're holding on to some assets, let's say you need to borrow, $2 million to keep yourself afloat, or $200,000, if the SBA says that there's a lot of business assets on the books, we would say we would like to use that as potential collateral for the disaster loan. If it's not available, let's say you're a service company and your IT company, there's no real physical assets, that will not be a reason to be given a loan or not given a loan. So we're not really too concerned with collateral. If you have it, they may ask you to pledge it, but if you don't have it, that doesn't mean you're not going to get an SBA disaster loan. So collateral is not a prerequisite for an SBA disaster loan. They'll always look at the business assets first, and then potentially personal assets second.
Okay, another question that we have is, what is the maximum revenue yearly to qualify?
It's a little bit difficult to answer, but if you go and you Google SBA small business size requirement, there's a document on the SBA website that will come up. It's about 20 pages long, and it states per industry what the maximum revenue is. Off the top of my head, I'll say, I think for, let's say, contractors who are building stuff, I think the maximum revenue is like 19 million per year over 2 years averaged, and that's in their primary NAICS code. So it's a number that most companies, as small or medium companies, would fall under. So in manufacturers, I think the number for a manufacturer is under 1,000 employees. So they're very generous in their qualifications.
Okay, great. So someone asked if the slideshow will be available to look at again. Yes, we actually will send out this recording to everyone once it is done being, downloaded and uploaded to our website. So don't worry about that. You will get this information and this recording sent to you again. One more question that we have is, can you give me a refresher on what the interest rate is and how long I have to repay it?
Yeah, so interest rate for all the SBA disaster loans for for-profit businesses is going to be 3.75%. And for nonprofits, it's going to be 2.75%.
Okay.
And it seems a little, it seems, in today's lower interest rate environment, it may seem a bit high, but that was authorized through Congress a year ago when the interest rates were still at their 5% level. So.
Okay, great. Well, Patrick, thank you so much. We greatly appreciate it for taking the time, to provide us this incredibly important information. As I mentioned before, we will be sending out the link to this recording very soon. So be on the lookout for that. Also be on the lookout as well for information on our other webinars. We will be having another Q&A session with Patrick later this week, so we really suggest you be on the lookout for that. Some other webinars that we have include Pivoting Your Business, where you can learn cost-efficient ways on how to sell your products online or through telecommunications. Another webinar that we will be hosting is Crisis Communications with Bolt Public Relations. So that will be really important in kind of learning that basic messaging to your key audiences throughout this pandemic. If you have any additional questions, please feel free to reach out to me. My email address is aparker@raleigh.bbb.org. And to be able to register for any of those webinars, you can visit bbbevents.org. So be on the lookout for that in your inboxes. And once again, Patrick, thank you so much for being here and presenting for us. So everyone have a great afternoon and be on the lookout for this recording.